You are now tuning into the Resilient Podcast. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Resilient Podcast. I am your host, Rob Aurelius, and today's episode is special because it is episode 40. You know, when I first started this podcast last year in April of 2024, I had no idea how much it would change me personally, because I did start this podcast with a partner, with a co-host. And unfortunately, that person decided that after 2 episodes, they didn't want to be part of the Resilient Podcast anymore. But since I've been on my own as the voice of the Resilient Podcast, I have to say that each episode, each guest, and each story has pretty much carried a lesson in resilience that I've kept with me. Some episodes left me inspired. Some left me emotional, of course. And some challenged me to reflect on my own journey of resilience. So today, I want to take you all, the Resilient Podcast family, I want to walk you back through the first 40 episodes. And I want to highlight some of the moments that stayed with me, the people who gave resilience a new meaning, and the lessons I'll carry into the next 40 episodes. Episode 80. Like I mentioned, this episode isn't just about reflection. It's about gratitude. And it's gratitude for every guest, every listener, and every moment that brought us here. Episode 40 is a reminder that resilience is not a destination. It's a lifelong journey. And I'm grateful to be on this journey with you all. For those that are watching this episode on YouTube, you can see that I am wearing the same Scully hat that I had last year when I started the first episode, episode 1. So 40 episodes later in 2025, it is now October 2025. Just last week, I was reminiscing on my trip to Atlanta last year with Diego when we were shooting parts of the Resilience documentary. And when we out there for WWE's PLE Bad Blood. Such a good show. And I was also reflecting on Danny Ocean, who was part of the Resilient Podcast last year. And I kept saying to myself, like, man, it's crazy that, it's a year later. And Danny Ocean was actually the first time that I actually did a podcast episode, that wasn't like virtual. And, I tried my best to deliver a good episode for everyone. And, it turned out to be an episode that a lot of people liked. A lot of people told me it was a good episode. And I'm glad that everyone enjoyed that episode because I enjoyed that conversation that I had with Danny Ocean. I think it was one of the best conversations I ever had. And, you know, that episode, believe it or not, was episode number 12 of the Resilient Podcast. And now here we are at 40 episodes. So, first and foremost, I want to say that it is important to acknowledge that it is National Depression Month. It is also National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And of course, one of my favorite causes that's near and dear to my heart, National Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And, you know, to me, National Depression Awareness Month is so important because, you know, folks, as of late, I have been talking to a lot of friends. I have been talking to a lot of people that support the Resilient Podcast and just my friends in general and people that I know. And a lot of people have been talking to me about like seasonal depression, just depression in general for the things that they're going through. And I'm like, listen, depression is a real thing. And one of the things that I personally dislike is when a folk will say something like, oh, depression is not real. It's all mental. I mean, of course it's mental because it's happening to you mentally, right? Depression is a mental thing that causes eventually, you know, physically to feel drained, emotionally to feel drained, but it starts mentally. But I'm not here to tell people, hey, be depressed all the time. I'm here to tell people that it's okay to be depressed, but it's important that we get ourselves out of that phase. So, before I get into this episode, for anyone out there right now that is going through it, my words to you are not alone. And I am here. And if you need to reach out, please do. And I will talk to you. But remember that you are not alone. So, folks, let's get into this episode today. Let's talk about resilience. And I want to talk about the power of vulnerability. Like, I want to highlight a few of the episodes that were special to me, like I mentioned in the beginning of this episode. And, you know, I remember when I hit record on that very first episode, I really had no idea what I was doing. You know, even though I had Josh's support and whatnot because he had the experience, but I knew I had to be vulnerable. I knew that I had to let it all out. I knew how to talk about this story that I wanted to talk about, which was the story of the breakup between Rob and his ex-girlfriend, Ashley. And I shared my story of heartbreak, of loss, and of trying to rebuild. And, you know, that was resilience in its purest form because I wasn't pretending to be okay. And I wasn't admitting that I wasn't. But at that moment, I know that it set a tone for everything that followed. And, you know, Josh was vulnerable and he talked about his situation. I was vulnerable and I talked about my situation. I mean, 40 episodes. And I want to say that a good 30 something of them have been about Rob's finding resilience because of the breakup between him and his ex. And, you know, I know it's now October 2025. Next month is going to be very difficult because had things gone my way last year, I would have proposed and I would have been engaged. And I would have been celebrating 1 year of engagement. And I would have been celebrating also another birthday with her. You know, she's turning 32 next month. But things didn't go the way I wanted. So on November 20th of last year, what I ended up doing was launching the Resilience Tribune. And the only thing I will be celebrating, even though I will be celebrating her 32nd birthday from afar, is the 1 year anniversary of the Resilience Tribune. And I look so forward to that. I really do. I also plan to release a nice video project that Diego and I are working on at the moment to promote and to show you guys, you know, what things consisted when with the just the Resilience Tribune. Last month September, I had someone who originally wanted to share their story and it was ready to go, and then I said to them, sure. But then I said to them, look, I don't want to seem selfish, but it's September and it's a very important month to me. Do you mind if I share my story? This would only be like maybe my fifth piece on the platform. And they're like, sure, it's your platform. Why not? And I said, no, I appreciate it. And I was like, and I don't want you to think that I'm one of those people that will literally ask someone to come on the platform and share their story and then be like, oh, your story will be shared another time. But this month's story is going to be a beautiful story from a special person who's been following my journey for a long time, someone who's actually been a social media friend for a long time. And we connected more because of this. We connected more because of the Resilience Tribune, the Resilient Podcast. And this person was able to see my vulnerability. And, the last episode, which was episode 39, was with Maddie Rock. And I want to talk about balancing dreams and reality, which was, the episode that I had with Maddie. So I had a great conversation with Danny Ocean. I had a great conversation with Jose Cruz, with Nikki Morardi, with Megaran, with Cornelius, with Gina. I'll never forget that conversation that I had with my good friend Nina. But, one of the most meaningful conversations I've had on the Resilient Podcast was with Maddie Rock. And we sat on the famous bench in Glen Rock, New Jersey, right? And we talked about balance, and how to chase your dreams while staying grounded in reality. But what I learned from that talk is that resilience isn't just about pushing forward. It's about finding balance when life feels uneven. It was a very good episode with Maddie and myself, and I'll never forget that. And again, I had a lot of meaningful conversations with Ron Girini, Justin Jones, my good friend Justin. It was a very good conversation that I had with him. But, everybody that's been on the Resilient Podcast, including Oscar, every guest on this podcast has been special to me because, listen, they helped make the podcast what it is today. And I'm just so thankful for it. I'm so thankful. And I truly, truly, truly appreciate everyone. But, I want to talk about when the 1 year anniversary of the Resilient Podcast came. And, originally, the plan was to actually interview Justin back then. This is something I never shared with people. And, I was going to Vegas for WrestleMania. I was going out to WrestleMania in Vegas. Justin was going out to WrestleMania, and he was there. And, Diego was supposed to come along as well, too. And then, unfortunately, plans changed, and Diego ended up not coming to WrestleMania. So I wasn't able to record an episode with Justin. And, I didn't have all the equipment, so I had to do the production all by myself. And I shot that episode by myself, and it was completely fine. But, episode 28 was filmed in Las Vegas, and it was the 1 year anniversary of the Resilient Podcast. And prior to that, like a few weeks before that was also the 1 year anniversary of my breakup. And that episode to me was very raw. It was painful as much as I seemed very at peace and very calm, but it was also about growth. I learned that resilience doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means transforming it into something meaningful. And that episode to me, I don't know about you all, but that episode to me was living proof that even heartbreak can give birth to healing, to projects, and to purpose. And, that, like I said, it was an episode where I was in the city where I wanted to propose to my ex-girlfriend on November 20th last year. People had asked me, hey, Rob, so question, if you were able to propose to your ex-girlfriend successfully last year, what have you ever created the Resilience Tribune that same day? And, it's funny because, again, it goes back to the original reason why the Tribune was even a thing, because originally the Resilience Tribune was originally called the Brooklyn Tribune, and it was a project that I had created back in like mid 2000s, and I never really got it off the floor. And I was actually planning of relaunching the Brooklyn Tribune. Actually, we were planning to launch it in the fall of 2023. And I got so caught up. I was so busy in a relationship once August came around, and I kind of pushed things over, and I said, should I do it in the spring of 2025? I was so in love that I decided to push the project a little bit further, the Brooklyn Tribune. And I said to myself, oh yeah, we're just going to launch it in the spring of 2024. And then when things started getting deeper, I said to myself, I'm going to give myself some time, and I'm not going to launch it till the fall of 2024. And then, of course, when spring 2024 came along, I was dealing with the problems with my ex-girlfriend. And man, it was bad. So I decided ultimately not to do anything with the Brooklyn Tribune. But, when the 1 year anniversary came along where her and I were supposed to be together for a year, August 18th, actually August 20th, because that was the day that I asked her to be my girlfriend. When August 20th, 2024 came along, that's where I started really thinking, because I was already recording the documentary. And I was like, you know what? The Resilience Tribune is something that I should consider, because this Tribune project, this platform that I created where people are supposed to share stories about Brooklyn, it's no longer the case. It's no longer what I want. And things change, right? It was just a pivotal moment for me. Like, things pivoted, and it was completely fine. And, I spoke to Maddie about it. I spoke to Diego about it. I spoke to James about it. I spoke to so many people about it, my therapist as well. And, everybody was like, look, it's your project. Do what you want to do with it. And I ultimately decided that I was going to shift the focus of the platform, and we were no longer going to talk about stories about Brooklyn. We could still talk about Brooklyn, but the new name was going to be the Resilience Tribune. And here we are. The Resilience Tribune was announced and launched officially November 20th. And then January of this year, 2025, the first publication came out. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. But folks, I want to take a moment to first and foremost I want to shed light on a situation. Um, Recently, I had a friend who had a relative that passed away. And before their relative passed away, they had told me that the relative had been listening to my podcast during their time in the hospital. And I didn't know that that was happening. I didn't know this relative was listening to my podcast. They couldn't watch it because they didn't have a laptop, but they um were listening to it on an iPod, and I said, I can't even believe that iPod is still the thing and that iPod is still out there. But because the Resilient podcast is available on Apple Music and iTunes, they were listening to my episodes, and I was like, wow, this is beautiful. And then that person was able to eventually get Spotify for them on their phone. And I was like, listen, you can listen to it on Spotify. And eventually, this person had an illness. They passed away. And I was able to see that person before they passed away recently. And I'll be completely honest, it really messed me up when I had to go see that person. This is somebody that I knew for quite some time, didn't know them like that, but I knew them for years, because this was someone who was someone that I knew as a child, and this was one of their relatives. So, as long as I knew this person, I knew this relative of theirs, but I just never was close. Long story short, this relative passed away. And the last thing they said to me was always remain resilient and make sure that you're resilient forever. And I'll never forget that. And I asked my friend if it was okay. And they said, well, yeah, you can mention them on a podcast, but please don't do, like in memory, please don't. So I wanted to take this time to say rest in peace to Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo came from El Salvador and worked so hard for his family. And unfortunately, Victor got sick over the years, got diagnosed with something, and they fought a very long fight until eventually they lost the battle. But this is the first person that's ever told me since I started the podcast, always remain resilient and make sure you're resilient forever. And I'll always cherish that. So I want to take a quick moment to, from the last episode, I made the announcement that Maddie Rocks Coffee is officially one of our sponsors. So I want to take this moment right now to give a shout out to those two sponsorships that I have now. So our first sponsorship from day one, Nala Health, holistic medication. I wouldn't even call it medication. Holistic medicine. Made here in the US, right out in California. My good man, Victor Melgar, is out there making a fortune with this and doing so good and actually helping people. So, folks, make sure that you visit nalahealth.com right here on the bottom and check out things that are good for insomnia, addiction, inflammation, which is one of my favorite ones because it helps me. Like, I get a lot of inflammation from, unfortunately, some of the food that I eat, and it's not a good thing. But this really helps me. And there's more things there. There's CBD creams or CBD oil, everything holistic, everything for your needs. And remember that there's always a free assessment on that website that you can check out so that Victor and his team could actually assess you better and accommodate your needs. So make sure, again, nalahealth.com and at checkout, make sure you type in the code TRP10 to save 10% off of your purchase. And this is not a one-time only. This is every time you purchase something. So shout out to Victor. Shout out to Nala Health. Thank you for holding it down. Thank you for being a proud sponsor of the Resilient Podcast. And folks, when we come back from commercial break, yes, there's a commercial break now. We're going to finish talking about a few things. 2 more highlights at least. About 40 episodes of the Resilient Podcast. So I'll see you guys in a bit. And we have much more to talk about when we come back. So for now, let's take a quick break and I'll talk to you guys soon. Folks, welcome back to the Resilient Podcast. Again, it's episode 40. I am your host, Robert Aurelius. And, we've been going over a few highlights of 40 episodes of the Resilient Podcast. And, one thing that I wanted to bring up is, I mentioned November, next month being a pretty difficult month for me because one, I will be thinking about Ashley's 32nd birthday. I'll be thinking about what could have been our 1-year anniversary engaged. But the only thing I will be celebrating for sure is the 1-year anniversary of the Resilient Podcast. Before I get into that, I wanted to give you all a quick update. So originally I had intended to release the Resilience documentary next month, November 20th, which is the 1-year anniversary of the Resilient Tribune. But instead, we are going to launch the Resilience documentary on December 3rd, 2025. And I'll tell you why. 2 days later, it will be the 6th anniversary since my grandmother passed away. But on that day, 12/3/2025, it's special because it's 1-2-3, right? December 3rd, it's 1-2-3. If you all remember, 3-2-1, which was March 21st, was the day that my ex and I broke up. So I'm playing around with the numbers and I came up with that idea. So the date that the documentary is going to be released is December 3rd, 2025. It's official. You have now heard it and seen me talking about it on the Resilient Podcast. So I know I've had a few folks asking me, like, hey, when is the documentary coming out? So that's the official date. And please expect a trailer coming out soon, later this month, just to show you guys where we're at with everything. But, getting back to the month of November, I usually do this thing where, we celebrate Movember. And what people do is guys grow a mustache in honor for someone that's out there planning to commit suicide. And, last month, September, was Suicide Prevention Month. Also in November, a lot of people do no shave November, right? So like they'll shave their beard and then just let it grow back, or their mustache, whatever. But in November, we focus on men's mental health. And, those conversations that I've always had about men's mental health remind me that resilience is not about bottling things up. It's about facing our struggles head on, speaking our truth, and reminding each other that vulnerability is strength. It's important to know that as a man, I feel that men need that space. And I'm proud that this podcast became a piece of that conversation. I'm proud that this podcast is a platform for that, for men to come along. If you noticed, I've had more male guests on my podcast than female guests, and I'm not doing that on purpose. I'm not doing that intentionally. I want to have just as much females on my podcast than males. But notice that we've had some serious conversations with these males. I always ask them about their mental health. I always ask them about everything. I've asked Megaran, I've asked Maddie Rock, I've asked Oscar, I've asked, Ron Gerini, Jose, pretty much everybody. And, one of my favorite, Justin, my friend Justin, but, one of my favorite episodes of all time was with Nick Loriano, where we talked about resilience. And that was episode 32. That was back in May. And, Nick and I had a very good conversation about resilience. Nick talked about mental health, suppression, how it's okay to talk about mental health. And Nick even disclosed with me that he had attempted to commit suicide several times. And I remember telling Nick, thank you for still being here. Thank you for making a difference. And thank you for letting your voice matter. Nick is happily engaged now. He's a very happy man, and I'm so happy for him, and I'm so proud of him. And I couldn't be prouder for him, And I appreciate that I had Nick on my episode, on my podcast. I appreciate that I had Nick on my podcast as a guest because he was one of the best guests that I had. And even Cornelius Minor, such a great conversation with him. Speaking about that, I want to close out this episode by saying, well, this is one of the final things I will say on this episode, but I'm not planning to end this episode right now. I want to talk about that. What stands out most to me after 40 episodes of the Resilient Podcast is the incredible community of voices that we've built. Guests like Yena, Oscar, I just mentioned Nick, Jose, Megaran, Danny Ocean, Maddie Rock, Nikki, and the list goes on and on and on. And, it's important to know that each story was different. No one really talked about no one talked about the same thing. Everybody's story was different. Everybody's story was unique. Danny Ocean talked about putting a gun in his mouth. Oscar talked about the day he lost his mother. Nick talked about all the times that he attempted suicide, and, it was very special to listen to these stories. And like I said, they were very different, but the common thread was resilience. We got to hear their victories, their struggles, and their truths, because it reminded me that none of us are alone in this. And I always say this to everyone as well, too. You are not alone. And the truth is, you are not alone. You may be physically alone in a room when you're sad and depressed, but that doesn't mean that you can't pick up that phone and make a phone call. That doesn't mean that you can't call a family member, a friend, a significant other, just someone, even a hotline if you have to. But remember, folks, that you're not alone, and that resilience lives in all of us. But yeah, folks, like, always remember that resilience lives in all of us. So before I close out this episode, I want to give another shout out to our other sponsor, which is Maddie Rocks Coffee. And I mentioned it to you guys earlier, and the link is right here to get the best roasted coffee out there in the US. I mean, hey, hopefully at some point the entire world, but the best coffee, in my opinion, in the United States is Maddie Rocks Coffee. And you can purchase your coffee by clicking on this link right here and using the same code TRP10 to save 10% off of your purchase. Folks, Maddie's going to have other flavors in the near future. But I tried the coffee. The coffee is amazing. One cup of coffee is all I need. All the caffeine that I need for the day. So thank you again, Maddie Rock, for becoming a sponsor to the Resilient Podcast. Also, make sure that if you want to follow us on social media, it's right here on the bottom. Follow TRP on Instagram and Twitter at The Resilient Pod. We are The Resilience Tribune on Facebook. Make sure to check out our website right here on the bottom, resiliencetribune.com. And while you're there, make sure that you make a visit to TRP shop and support the brand by purchasing some of our products that are on there, hoodies, now that it's the fall, t-shirts. In the near future, we're going to get more swag, more stuff on there. So shout out to our folks at For Your Wear, my guy Blue, for supporting the Resilient Podcast. And folks, today I have a card from James from the You Got This 100 Inspiring Quotes. And today's card says, the comeback is always stronger than the setback. And this is exactly what I was talking about before. Don't allow whatever it is that's bothering you to dictate what happens. Let it define you. Let it teach you who you are, and let it bring out everything that it needs to bring out. But ultimately, don't let it continue to be a setback. Make it become part of your comeback, your strong comeback. And that's my message to the world today. So as I look back at these 40 episodes, I just want to simply just say thank you to everyone that has watched and listened. Again, I want to thank every guest who has shared their story, and to everyone who's reminded me that resilience is more than just a podcast theme. It's a way of life. So normally I have my Terramana here, and trust me, it's here in spirit. And I would have made a toast for the next 40 episodes, but unfortunately, I'm a little under the weather. And because when the cold weather gets here, living in New York, I start getting the sniffles. So I'm a little under the weather right now, and I've been on some antibiotics the last few days. So that's the reason why I am not taking a shot of Terramana. But trust me, it's here in spirit. I'm staying hydrated. I got my water right next to me. But let's pretend that it's a glass of Terramana right now. I want to make a Terramana toast to the next 40 episodes, and to continue sharing stories that remind us of the strength we all carry inside. So once again, folks, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for being on this journey with me. It really means a lot. And I promise you that the next time that we reach a milestone, which would most likely be episode 50, and I know episode 50 is coming, but I believe episode 50 won't be till next year, 2026, and that's completely fine. But when episode 50 comes, or even before the end of the year, the final episode of the year, I will make sure that I have a Terramana with me so we could have that Terramana toast. But folks, I want to thank you all for tuning in to this episode. Thank you for being part of 40 episodes of the Resilient Podcast. I hope you're enjoying it. Don't hesitate to reach out to me on my socials, at Rob Aurelius everywhere. Don't hesitate to reach out to the Resilience Tribune platform, the Resilient Podcast. I want to thank you all for tuning in to episode 40, and I look forward to seeing you all at episode 41. Thanks for listening, and I will see you guys soon. Remember to always remain resilient. See you next episode. Peace.